Noticed, some commonalities and some specific steps that if people will just follow them, they'll put themselves in a better position and on a better path to get the promotions that they're looking for.
Welcome to the Medical Sales Accelerator podcast. I'm Zed Williamson.
And I'm Clark Wiederholm.
This podcast exists to put scale to the value you get from those great one-to-one conversations at conferences and sales meetings.
You're a high achiever. You've crushed goals your entire career. Now you're starting to think about career advancement.
That's why we're speaking with our guest today, Bret Barrie. Bret was a Hall of Fame and President's Club winning sales rep and has been a top producing sales leader in multiple industries. He's author of The Selling Edge, How to Reach the Top in Any Sales Industry, and his newest book that just came out, Promoted, The Proven Path to Career Advancement. He's a baseball enthusiast, fitness junkie, happily married, and 3 children, and lives in the greater Sacramento area. Bret, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, thanks, guys. Appreciate you having me on.
So, Bret, your latest book that's coming out, Proven Path to Career Advancement. Why did you feel like there was a need for this book and the content that is out there now?
Yeah, no, I felt like there was a real need for the book, just in the fact that, when I look back on my career, especially 10, 12, 13 years ago, I'd been a top achiever in a couple different sales industries, had done well, had earned President's Club, and was inducted into my first company's Hall of Fame. And I reached a point where I knew that there was a higher level of fulfillment. I wanted to lead others. I wanted to make that transition into leadership. And when I looked around, I was seeing a bunch of people around me that were being promoted. And I wasn't. And it took me a while to really figure out why that was. Why were these people getting promoted ahead of me? A lot of them, in hindsight, didn't stay in the roles that they were in for very long either, which, we could probably talk about as well. But really, it took me a long time to get there. But I was able to make the transition into leadership. And then, through leading several teams over the last several years, I've noticed, some commonalities and some specific steps that if people will just follow them, they'll put themselves in a better position and on a better path to get the promotions that they're looking for. And so I really felt there was a need for the book, for people that are higher achievers that want to succeed, and then also for people that are leading sales teams and are responsible for developing others.
We've had a lot of guests on this podcast, and one of the things that we talk about sometimes before we start recording with our guests is we're always okay talking theory, and we need to get to some actionable tactical steps. And what I can tell the audience specifically about your book that I really appreciated, it is tactical. In other words, it is a to-do list with actionable items. And there was actually a point I grinned at this part of your book because there was some confidence behind these 2 lines that you stated. And the 2 lines were basically, this will work unless you don't do what was in here or you don't do it for long enough. Walk us through why you believe that.
Well, yeah. And I appreciate you calling out that the book is a little tactical. I felt like that was one of the downfalls, or I guess one of the opportunities to really hit it with this book is when you look at a lot of these types of books out there, they're filled full of theory and philosophy and, which is all great foundation. But really, I think what people are looking for is they want a roadmap that they could follow. They want steps to say, okay, if I can do these 3 things or these 4 things, in this case, in the book, these 10 things, I'm going to put myself into a better position where that's going to be possible. And so that was really the goal of the book, and probably why it took a long time for me to get it done. Is I didn't just want it to be a to-do list. I wanted to have stories also that were incorporated in that were relevant and real for people. And so I was really intentional with that along the way.
Yeah, I think the stories will clearly connect. There's some sections where you walk through some difficult conversations. And I think many times, when people are high achievers, we bump our head a little bit, we tweak, we pivot, we get better. And then when we look back at what we achieved, there typically is some process that we ended up following, whether we knew it at the time or not. It's actually can be repeatable. And that's what it feels like you've put together, is what that repeatable process is. And one thing you talk about in the book that stood out to me was owning. I don't know if these are the exact words, but basically understanding or owning your personal brand. Can you walk the audience through that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the story I tell of where it resonated for me was back in the fall of 2010. I had been a medical device rep at that point for I think 5 or 6 years, and I was in an appointment with this doctor in Stockton, California, Dr. Robinson, and helping him with a post-op patient fitting. And we helped the patient. We were done, and after that appointment, he called me and said, "Bret, I want you to come in my office real quick." And so I walk in there and he says, "Hey, are you okay?" And I said, "Of course, I'm great. I've never been better. Me and my wife, we're getting married. We're moving in together, and life is good. Do I seem that happy? Is that why you're asking?" He said, "No, you've lost a ton of weight. Like, I mean, you look, I think, still healthy, but you've lost a ton of weight. And, I just wanted to make sure you were okay and that you weren't sick or anything." And what he had called out was the fact that before my wife and I started dating, I was probably the party guy. I'd be out for dinner and drinks 3, 4 nights a week. Young, was single, and so the minute we started dating, I stopped drinking so much and stopped going out so much, and just immediately lost a bunch of weight. And so that was one thing. And then the second thing, a year later, this guy, Gabe, who was a mentor of mine when I first got into med sales, uh, we were at a conference, and he, out of the blue, he said, "Bret, man, you seem different. Like, you're different." And I said, "Oh, I know. Yeah, everyone's been telling me that. I lost a bunch of weight. We're getting married." And I go down the whole rabbit hole. He said, "No, no, no. You seem different. Like, you're more responsible. You seem like you care about people a little bit more. Like, I can tell you've changed, like, in a good way." And that was really where the light bulb went off to me. And that was also the time where I hadn't gotten some promotions and was really trying to work on this. And it really dawned on me that the first 3, 4 years in medical sales, I was building my own personal brand the whole time. And there was a perception of me by those around me, and obviously those above me, as to who I was. And that perception obviously influenced whether or not they felt that I was ready for the next role and to move into leadership. And so I really dive into that in extensive detail in the book, because I think that that's something that really can't be overstated. For anyone listening to this, is you have to know, one, where you're at in your career right now may not be where you want to be in 5, 10, 15 years, but the things that you're doing and how you're building your brand and how you're being perceived by those above you, that is absolutely positioning you for it. And so I would just encourage people to be very conscious of how they're being perceived by others, and how they're acting.
It's an interesting topic. This is where I hold two very conflicting beliefs. One belief is I can't offend you. In other words, you have to choose to be offended. I have that as a deep belief. I also believe at the same time that I have to understand your perspective and where you are emotionally, so that I don't create negative emotions in you, knowing that you are going to respond different ways. And someone might call me a hypocrite by believing those two things, because they're basically opposite. But that's kind of what you're talking about, is someone may not realize that, the little blip that you represent on someone's radar might just always be at that time that's creating a brand that you're not really aware of.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point. I share the same. I actually share the same thought on that. I think there is a balancing effect where, you want to be who you are, but at the same time, I think you have to think, where do you want to be, and who are the people that are responsible for making those decisions, and what's the process going to look like? And the exact question I use in the book is, would the CEO hand you the keys to the company? Which, I think in most cases, and most people, from a skill standpoint or an experience standpoint, they're not ready. But I think when you look at it from a character standpoint, senior leaders making decisions to promote people into leadership roles, is probably the most important decision they have to make in leading a company. And there's a high level of risk involved with that. And it's not a perfect process. They're trying to assess, what's the risk versus the reward of promoting this person into this role. And so, yeah, unfortunately, that does put us in subjective, situations where people are judging us. They're judging how they think we're going to be and how we're going to act. But there's a reason for that. They're trying to build a company. They're trying to make the decisions that are best. So I agree with you. And I would tell people you should absolutely be who you are. But you should also be mindful of, how your actions and what you do is going to be perceived by those around you and especially those above you.
You mentioned earlier that some folks that had received promotions that were around you, they didn't necessarily stay in those roles for very long or over a long tenure. What did you witness behind that?
Yeah, and it's interesting. I didn't really think about it too much at the time. It's kind of one of those things that in hindsight, I've realized that at that time I was disappointed. I had interviewed for a couple management roles, didn't get them early on. I talk about that, that experience throughout the book and what we did to fix that. But I remember being really frustrated at the time. And in hindsight, it was actually the best thing for me because looking around at some of those people that did get promoted, some stayed in their roles for a long time and have moved up, but a lot of them didn't. And even, the example in one of my last management jobs, I had to clean up a region where that exact thing happened, where unfortunately someone got promoted too early. And I think that it's, if you're passed up for a job, and this is the advice I would give anyone that's listening to this, is if you have been passed up for a promotion, it's okay to not be happy about it. Obviously, everyone wants to do better, but I think what you have to look at is what's the reason why you weren't promoted, and you have to get that feedback from whoever the hiring manager was, maybe the person that's above them, and then figure out, what are the skills that they feel are necessary to have or experience that you need to show that you have to where they would feel more comfortable the next time. And I think that, I am in hindsight really grateful that I wasn't promoted too early. Each of the management opportunities that I've had have all gone extremely well. And I think a big part of that is because it took an extra few years for me to get that first promotion. I really had to get serious about, what the skills were, the things I was going to have to do in a leadership role, how to create culture, how to connect with people, all of the things that are necessary for leading teams of people. And so I would just encourage people, if you have been passed up, don't let it discourage you too much. Take the feedback, as hard as it is to swallow, and really use it and continue moving forward, because you're going to get your opportunity.
It stings, right? And we're wired for it to sting because our brains are wired to kind of treat things as if it's, fight or flight, and it's hard to say, like, owning it. It's hard to own it. It's easier to say, well, screw that dude, screw them. They don't know what the heck they're talking about. So what should someone ask specifically if they didn't get what they were expecting? What's the step that they should take at that point?
Yeah. And this is exactly what I had to do a couple times, actually. I think it doesn't need to be too complicated. I think, really the first thing is acknowledging that you respect the decision that's been made. That is probably one of the most important steps, because we've all seen it. Anyone that's been around for a while has seen, and you go to the national sales meeting and see someone that didn't get a promotion, and then, they're at the national sales meeting moping around, or they're at the bar having one or two too many drinks. That's obviously not the way to handle that situation. I think the first thing is, really letting the person know that you respect the decision they made. Obviously, they felt like that person was the right decision at that time, but that, you would really like to get their feedback on what they feel like you need to do to be able to be in a better position for the next time. And that's exactly what I had to do. I got passed up for a couple management positions, and the first time I didn't do that. I mean, I was respectful about it, but I didn't actually follow up on the roadmap that would help me build the skills necessary. And then you can read in the book, there's a few tough conversations that were had at a national sales meeting where it got me back on that path. And we were able to create a roadmap. And that's the third thing, is really once you approach a senior leader like that and ask them for feedback to help create a roadmap for you to follow, they're going to work with you. And they're going to let you know exactly what the skills are that you're going to need to show that they don't feel like you have. And the good leaders are going to let you volunteer to lead. The best example of that I can see, that I could explain is like one of my daughters is a ballerina, has been since she's been 3 years old. And they do a huge ballet recital where they perform this program 7 or 8 times over like a 2-week period of time. It's like every night, 1 or 2 shows, but they practice for that for a year. Literally, she goes to ballet 6 days a week for 2 to 3 hours a day. For a whole year, they practice this. And I think that's the opportunity that, if I would really try to encourage someone, volunteer to lead and ask if, you can help run part or a whole team meeting. Ask if you can sit in on interviews. Ask if you can help mentor some newer representatives that have started. Do things like that. Another opportunity is companies are always evaluating different software platforms. I had an opportunity to be on a CRM brand team in one of my first sales jobs. Invaluable experience, because you get to see how decisions are made. You also get to interact with senior leaders in the organization and get them to know you. And so, I would encourage people to volunteer to lead. It's like, I would call it a dress rehearsal. Sometimes they need to know that the risk of putting you in that management position doesn't outweigh the reward that you could potentially bring, right? And so to me, if you don't get a promotion, that's what you need to do. You got to go back and figure out where the gap was and how you put yourself in a better position the next time.
I'm going to play devil's advocate real quick.
Okay.
Someone out there is saying every time management has promoted someone, it's gone horribly or, poorly. Why should I ask them what I need to improve if they keep putting the wrong people in the role?
Well, that's a good question, and I think they're going to know that there's a problem. I think, the challenge of what comes up is sometimes as a company, you're trying to evaluate, does it make sense to promote someone internally to a management job, or are we better going outside the company? Obviously, there's pros and cons both ways. I would tell people, you really can't control any of that. All you can do is figure out what the company's objectives are. Obviously, HR and, the VP of sales or whoever it is, if they've turned over and, 2 or 3 managers in a period of time, they know that there's a problem. They want someone that's going to stick. And so, you really can't control any of that. But what you can do is you can try to get an understanding of where they're trying to take things, how they're trying to improve. And you can put yourself in that position. In the book, I talk about networking up the ladder. I think this is a perfect time to engage senior leaders, even a level or 2 above you, and really, ask them about that and say, hey, I hope you don't mind me asking you a hard question here, but I've seen you've went through 2 or 3 region managers in the last few years. I'm really interested in a role like that. Obviously, I want to take the steps to be ready. What's that look like for you guys? Like, what are you trying to do with the next hire? I think it's okay if you tell people, hey, I don't mean to create a bad situation here or offend you, but I do realize this could be a problem. How are we trying to solve it? In my experience, senior leaders, if you're the person that comes and tries to ask them if you can help propose a solution to a problem, they're usually far more likely to be engaged in the conversation than just approaching them and pointing out a problem. I mean, they know the problems exist. That's what senior leaders try to do is solve problems all day. So if you actually bring a solution, you'll differentiate yourself and you'll get on the radar very quickly. And they'll probably start pulling you into projects and networking with you as well.
You talked about not being ready when you got passed up a few times early in your career, or earlier in those, those promotional opportunities. I'm curious, having some hindsight, what parts weren't you ready for, and what did you develop over that couple of years before you got that opportunity that made you a better, put you in position to be better at the next job?
I think had I gotten that first promotion, what would have happened is I had been a top sales rep at that point for, I don't know, 7 or 8 years, something like that. And, I think the innate nature of top performing salespeople that haven't gone through extensive leadership training is they get promoted and they think, all right, well, I was a top rep in the company. And so there's 8 people on the team. This is going to be easy. We're just going to make sure all 8 of these territories run their territory like I did. And these people do it exactly how I did. And we're going to have the top producing region in the company here in like a year. And what they fail to realize is that, people are different, territories are different, everybody's situation's different. People have different motivations for why they go to work. They have different life situations. And so I can tell you for a fact, had I gotten promoted the first couple times I interviewed for a leadership role, I probably would have flamed out too, because I would have approached it that way. And what it took was obviously learning about how to lead a team, really how to connect with people, how to understand why people work, what's their motivation. Also understanding that sometimes there's not one exact way to do everything, and
Sure.
Sales leaders that have worked with a lot of teams, they understand this. But the other thing is the importance of building a team culture, what a healthy team culture looks like. I think a lot of first-time managers, especially, they come in and they think, they get their marching orders from the company of this is how we need to do things. And there's a balance there because, you do have to share the company's vision, and the goals are the goals, those are the objectives. But I think the how people execute that vision, I think there can be a little bit of wiggle room on that. And that's where the teams that I lead, I'm always looking for two-way feedback. We communicate, hey, here's the goals, here's the objectives, but hey, I want your guys' thoughts. What's going well? What isn't going well? If there's some additional training or something we need to look at, let's bring some people in. Let's have someone who has figured it out. Let's try to share some best practices, and really, creating that positive culture where people feel safe and they feel like they can express if something's not working right. I think that's something I would have probably struggled with had I gotten promoted too early, but I think it's all really important. I mean, to me, the team culture and keeping people engaged and knowing that you support them and you support what they're doing today and what they're interested in the future. To me, those are the top 3 things as a leader that you've got to do.
What advice do you give to somebody that's in the spot where they probably don't have those that might be contributing to opportunities moving past them? What did you do, and what do you advise, even if it's over and above what you actually did in your personal experience, for them to skill up in those areas?
Yeah. So I think a couple things. One is I would say start now. Like when you think about if you want to lead a team and you want to be in a leadership position, not to use the whole phrase act as if, but really start now. Start thinking of how do you have to present yourself and start leading by example. Little things like showing up early, being prepared, being engaged, not being afraid to participate. And then I think, in chapter 5 in the book, the whole book is called State Your Intent, where I go through and I talk about that process of how you have to let your boss know what your career goals are, and some steps that you can do along the way. To me, that's the other thing, is really trying to look for opportunities to where you can show your leadership ability. If you can't always control where your company's at, you can't always control who your boss is, what's going on around you. Sometimes, and I've seen it all over the board. We all have. Sometimes you're in a good situation. Sometimes you're in a bad situation. Sometimes you have a good boss. Sometimes your boss, they may not be in a great situation themselves. You can't control any of that. But what you can control, and I do believe that if you do the right things and you show your leadership ability and your engagement, your willingness to continue to improve and help others, at a certain point, someone's going to notice. You're going to get your opportunity. May not always be within the time frame that someone wants, but eventually they're going to get that opportunity.
Do you feel that it's difficult for the high performer, especially if you're talking sales? They're completely in control of their own world, at least in their mind they are. And it's, well, you know what? All I need to do is work another 90,000 hours, or I just, being able to, is that one of the most difficult things, is coming away from that and looking to see how do I help 8 other people who are completely wired differently than I am, and someone believes this, someone else believes this, someone else believes this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a great point. And early on, I think it's one of those ahas that a new sales manager, if they're going to become a great sales manager, the switch has to flip, and you have to realize, wait, me working harder doesn't necessarily equal the team doing better. Because if you're a sales manager and say you're managing a region or half the country or what have you, 98 to 99% of the time, you're going to have to rely on your team to do what they need to do without you being there. And so really it takes a different approach. Obviously, coaching, and I would encourage people, I think the best way to get this experience is to become a field sales trainer. For anyone that's out there, that, if you want the quickest way to learn really how to build coaching skills and how to develop what you're talking about right there, I think being a field sales trainer where, it's a safe opportunity, but you've got an ability to help bring on new hires, maybe participate in advanced training. You're going to have more action-oriented conversations with sales reps where, they're going to have to do some of the to-do items that you guys build out in their development plan when you're not there. And then it also gives you the opportunity, when you have one-on-one follow-up calls with them, to help, ensure accountability. And, I can tell you those situations where if someone didn't do what they said they were going to do, how you handle those situations, to me, is one of the big marks of what makes a great leader, because you want to engage that person more. You want to engage them more and get them to actually take the action that they know that they should take. But unfortunately, I think, there is a skill to that, and it takes a lot of practice. And done wrong, you actually drive people away, and that's not what you want, because you want salespeople to be engaged. So
when you think about the book, obviously to write a book is that is a massive task. Hours, you're just, a ton of work goes into it. Is there any other part of the book that you have this like special place in your heart that you just wish every rep out there, every person who's interested in advancement, just gets their hands on?
Yeah, I think probably chapter 10, which the title of it is Off Self and On Purpose. And, the interesting dichotomy about leadership is, once you move into leadership, nothing is about you at all, but it's all your responsibility. And so it's on you, but it's not about you. And where this really resonated was, I went through a leadership development program early in my career before I got promoted. And at the end of that program, they asked us, the evening before the national sales meeting, we had to do a whole 5-minute presentation to the whole C-suite of the company. And I don't know why, but for whatever reason, I ended up being the last one to go. I guess they thought I was going to, be the closing
on it.
Close it down.
Which, definitely didn't feel that way at the time. So I get up to start giving the presentation, and of course the other 7 people just absolutely crushed it, and I'm thinking, oh goodness, this is great. And so I get up and I go to speak, and I literally can't say anything. Like, nothing's coming out of my mouth. I'm so nervous. And so I read down on my piece of paper, and I had the quote that Cal Ripken gave after he had started his 2,632 straight games. That, they interviewed him and they asked, what was the goal? What was the key to you not missing a day of work for 18 straight years? And he said, I became really comfortable being uncomfortable. And so in that moment, I read that, and then I said, as my voice is crackling, and as you guys can tell, I'm operating off of that right now. And everyone like erupts in laughter, and then the rest of the presentation went great. But it reminded me, I was like, what I actually did there is I stopped focusing on myself and focused on what was my purpose here. My purpose was to present the information for the audience. And really, the interesting thing was they were already sold on what we had done in this leadership program. The CEO and the VP of sales and everybody, they'd all been in as we'd gone through this over the last year and a half. So they were already happy with how it had gone. What they truly wanted is our feedback to see, were there any changes that needed to be made the next time they did the program? Did they need to source a different vendor? That type of stuff. And so it really wasn't even about us at all. And I think that's the biggest lesson that I would try to encourage someone to listen to here is, if you're interested in pursuing leadership roles, being off self and on purpose is one of the most important things. It's not about you. It's not about how you used to run your territory. It is truly, how do I help the company? And then how do I support the people that are responsible for producing for the company? And remove yourself from the equation. It's interesting. My first role as a sales leader, I had this rep that worked for me, and he had great ideas. He'd come to me like once every few months with a different marketing piece or a different idea on how reimbursement should work or this and that. And the interesting thing is when you peeled back the onion and looked at all of his ideas, is they all were going to help him, but they may not have been able to be scalable. They may not have helped the whole company. And eventually we were having a one-on-one, and I said, all right, so I get this. This makes sense. It's a good idea. Remove yourself and your territory from the equation, because I know the marketing team, they've got like the whole year mapped out of pipeline stuff they have to do on their end. But remove yourself from the equation. And if you still think it makes sense for everybody, then come back to me and let's talk about it. And he comes back a couple of weeks later and he says, you know what? It makes sense, but it's not going to help everybody. But can we still ask the marketing team about it? I said, bingo. Yeah, absolutely. So we did, and it ended up being a project that the marketing team did do. And eventually we did scale it. But, I would just say, learn how to remove yourself from the equation, and you will paint yourself in a bigger picture. You'll be able to connect with a lot more people. And obviously, your organization is going to reach a higher level of success as well, because you're truly going to be making decisions that are best for everybody.
The answer may be no, but do you have differing advice for folks that are not necessarily looking to go from, say, sales rep to sales manager, sales leader role, but really their advancement that they're looking for is jumping into marketing or rolling into other aspects of an organization? Does your advice change at all?
Yeah, it does a little bit. I think the same process is still relevant. You need to express your career interests to your boss. You need to be meeting your objectives in your current role. To me, those are, that's the one prerequisite we really haven't talked about much on this podcast is, and that's chapter 1, crush your current job.
Yeah.
Which, may be obvious to some, but you'd be surprised, how many people want to do other things and they're not even meeting the basic expectations of their current role. So, I'd say that's number 1. Definitely, if you have interests that are outside of sales management, absolutely, you have to express those with your boss. And then in chapter 3, I talk about building relationships with all. And I think this is a perfect opportunity. If you have an interest in marketing, if you have an interest in corporate accounts, strategic accounts, reimbursement, whatever that may be, network with the people that run those departments. And, if you have an interest, let your boss know, talk to them, see if you can shadow them and see if it makes sense, if it's something you're interested in, if that can be what your roadmap is headed toward.
I'm curious how often there are folks that are getting passed over for, a direct promotion to, say, sales manager, but really the company sees their skill sets or some of the strengths that they bring to the table as fitting in a different, arena of the organization. And so I just always encourage folks to not just think of that very next step that's kind of the linear path that everybody sort of falls down, at least on the sales side.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. I think sometimes you do have to be willing to take lateral moves or moves that, may not ultimately be the next role you want, but it's a role that develops a specific skill set or gives you visibility or gives you an opportunity to show that you contribute in a different way. No, I agree. Absolutely.
Bret, I really appreciate you taking the time today. I think this book is very well worth people buying and reading. It's what I liked about it. And I brought it up in the beginning. I'm just going to repeat myself because I did appreciate the tactical aspect of this book. It truly is a roadmap. The book is titled Promoted: The Proven Path to Career Advancement, and it's available on Amazon. And we will have links directly to the book as well. And then also our audience may want to just reach out to you or connect with you on LinkedIn. Is it okay for us to put your LinkedIn connection link in the show notes as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I love networking on LinkedIn. If anyone in your audience wants to connect, absolutely go ahead, connect with me. I do post pretty frequently on LinkedIn too, different arrays of inspirational or educational materials. So if they want to ring the bell on my profile, they'll get updated on my posts. And then my website's another good way to catch me, just BretBarrie.com, Bret with one T, and then Barrie's Barrie.
And if someone goes to that website, what would they find there, just to make sure that they understand everything that is available?
Yeah, so I've got a sales blog that I update, every so often, which is filled full of either sales or leadership type advice. I've got links to my books on there, and then also, if they want to contact me, there's a form that they can contact me through. So
great. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time today.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. So visit medicalsalesaccelerator.com. When you do so, there's a couple things to do. First of all, you can suggest guests or topics for upcoming shows. You can listen to previous shows, and you can also download resources that help you communicate better with your clients.
If you found value in today's episode, do a few things for me. Leave us some stars, shoot a review, and subscribe to the podcast. It helps other people find the content more easily, and we greatly appreciate it. Bret, thanks for joining us again. Make it a great week, everybody.